I remember the exact moment. My life split into two halves, before that dinner and after it. I was sitting at the head of the table, the same table I had bought 38 years ago when my wife Sylvia and I moved into our first real house. Back then, that table was too big for our little dining room. Sylvia used to laugh about it. She said, "Raymond, why did you buy a table for 10 people when it is just the two of us?" And I told her because one day this table will be full. And it was. Oh, it was full that night. My son Gerald was there with his wife, Diana. My daughter Patricia was there with her husband, Thomas. My 2 grandchildren were running around in the living room. The house smelled like roasted lamb and fresh bread. There was wine on the table. There was laughter in the air. And I had just slid a document across the table to my wife Sylvia, a document that said, in plain legal language, that I was transferring $100 million into her personal account. Everything, every single cent I had built over 50 years of working, saving, investing, and sacrificing. Because I was tired, because I trusted her, because I thought, after all these years, she deserved it. Sylvia looked at the document, she looked at the number, and then she smiled. Not the warm smile I fell in love with 40 years ago. A different smile, one I had never seen before. She folded the document neatly, placed it beside her plate, and said, "Thank you, Raymond." Then she reached across the table and handed me a glass of water. I almost drank it. I almost didn't notice the old housekeeper, Mrs. Elena, standing quietly in the corner of the room. She had worked for us for 22 years. She was 71 years old. She had arthritis in both hands and still insisted on coming to work every day because she said the house felt like her home. She walked past me slowly, pretending to collect empty bread plates, and her old hand accidentally bumped my shoulder. She leaned close to my ear, and she whispered 3 words that stopped my heart. "Don't drink it." I didn't move. I didn't blink. She whispered again, softer this time, like a breath. "Swap the glasses, quietly." My hand was already on the glass. The table was loud with conversation. Gerald was talking about his new car. Diana was laughing at something Thomas said. The grandchildren were shrieking happily from the other room. Sylvia was still smiling, cutting a small piece of lamb on her plate. I looked at Sylvia's glass. It was identical to mine. Same crystal, same waterline, same table. I counted to 3 inside my head. Then, casually as a man who has spent 50 years staying calm in a storm, I reached across, pretended to adjust the centerpiece, and switched the glasses. Nobody noticed. I sat back in my chair. I said nothing. And exactly 1 minute later, I counted. Sylvia lifted her glass and took a long, slow sip. She swallowed. She set the glass down, and then the tragedy began. "Let me tell you who I am, so you understand the full weight of what happened. My name is Raymond Acaffer. I am 68 years old. I grew up in a small town, the son of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. We were not poor, but we were never comfortable either. I wore the same pair of shoes for 3 school years. I shared a bedroom with my 2 brothers until I was 19, but I never complained. My mother used to say, 'Raymond, a quiet man is not a weak man. A quiet man is a man who is thinking.' I carried those words my whole life. I met Sylvia when I was 22. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She had this way of tilting her head when she laughed, like she was trying to keep the joy from spilling out. I fell in love with her in the first week. I married her in the 2nd year. We started with nothing. I worked 2 jobs for the first 5 years of our marriage. During the day, I was an accountant at a small firm. At night, I cleaned offices. I never told anyone about the night job, not even my brothers, because I was not ashamed. I just didn't want people to feel sorry for me. Sylvia knew, and she never complained either. She worked as a teacher. She cooked every meal from scratch. She mended our clothes instead of buying new ones. We were a team. Then, around age 35, I made a decision that changed everything. I had saved a small amount of money, not much, barely enough, and I invested it in a small piece of land on the edge of the city. Everyone told me I was making a mistake. My brother Lawrence said, "Raymond, that land is worth nothing. It is too far from everything." But I had a feeling, a quiet, strong feeling in my chest, the kind you cannot explain. 15 years later, that land was in the middle of one of the fastest growing commercial districts in the country. I sold it, reinvested, sold again, built, expanded, and by the time I was 55, I was worth more money than I had ever imagined possible. But I never changed. I still drove a modest car. I still ate simple food. I still woke up at 5 in the morning and read the newspaper with my tea. I still remembered what it felt like to count coins before buying groceries. My children grew up in comfort. Gerald went to a good university, studied business, and married Diana, a sharp, ambitious woman from a wealthy family. Patricia studied law and married Thomas, who was kind but always slightly overwhelmed by life. I was proud of both of them. But somewhere along the way, and I cannot tell you exactly when, things began to shift. It started small, the way these things always do. A few years ago, Gerald and Diana moved into a bigger house on the other side of the city. A beautiful house. I had quietly helped them with the down payment, $500,000, without being asked. I never mentioned it again. I didn't need to. But Diana began coming to our family dinners with a different energy. She would walk in and look around our home, the home I had lived in for 30 years, and there would be this tiny curl at the corner of her lips. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown, just a quiet, subtle look that said, "This house is not impressive enough." One Sunday she said to Sylvia, not to me, but loudly enough that I could hear from the next room, "Mother, have you considered renovating? This kitchen is quite dated, don't you think?" I said nothing. Sylvia laughed and said, "Raymond likes it the way it is." Diana said, "Well, Raymond has always been a bit traditional." She said the word traditional the way some people say old-fashioned, the way people say it when they mean behind. I was reading a book in the next room. I turned the page and kept reading. Gerald was no better. He had started talking to me differently, the way a man talks to someone he no longer fully respects. He would explain things to me slowly, like I was hard of understanding. He would cut me off mid-sentence at family discussions. One time, I was telling a story about my early years in business, something I thought might help him, and he checked his phone 3 times while I was speaking. I stopped the story. He didn't notice, but it was Patricia's husband, Thomas, who hurt me in a different way. Not through rudeness. Thomas was never rude. He hurt me through absence. He was always polite, always pleasant, but he was never really present. He never asked me a single question about my life, not one. In 15 years of being my son-in-law, Thomas had never once sat with me and said, "Raymond, tell me about yourself." To him, I was a comfortable piece of furniture, present, useful when needed, otherwise invisible, and Sylvia. I want to be fair to Sylvia. For most of our marriage, she was a good woman, a hardworking woman, a loyal woman. But money does something to people, not always quickly, but sometimes slowly over many years. The comfort of wealth begins to change the way a person sees the world and the people in it. Sylvia had developed a group of friends, wealthy women from the neighborhood association, from charity galas, from the golf club she had joined 5 years ago. And these women had a way of measuring everything: whose husband was more successful, whose home was larger, whose children had done better. And I began to notice slowly, painfully, that Sylvia had started measuring too. She began making small comments about my clothes. "Raymond, that jacket is quite old." About my car. "Gerald says you should get a newer model. It looks better for appearances. About my hobbies. Do you have to spend your Sunday mornings in the garden? It looks like something a groundskeeper would do. I said nothing. I kept gardening, but I started watching. I started paying attention to the small things. The way she spoke to Mrs. Elena, sharp, impatient, dismissive. The way she talked about my old friends from the early years. Those people are from a different chapter of our life. Raymond. The way she had, over time, quietly erased the humble version of our story and replaced it with a glossier one. In her version of our history, we had always been comfortable. We had always been this, the two jobs. The counted coins, the shared bedroom, those stories had been retired, and I began to wonder quietly, in the way I wonder about everything, who exactly had I been sharing my life with. 3 months before that dinner, I received news from my doctor that I did not share with anyone, not with Gerald, not with Patricia, not with Sylvia. My heart was not in good condition. It had not been for some time. I would need a procedure, a serious one, and even with the procedure, there were no guarantees about the years ahead. I sat in the car outside the doctor's office for 45 minutes without starting the engine. I thought about all the things a man thinks about when he is suddenly confronted with his own ending. And I made a decision. I would put my affairs in order. I would be responsible. I would protect my family. And most importantly, I would trust the people I loved with everything I had worked for. I called my lawyer, Mr. Adami, and told him to begin preparing the documents. I was going to transfer the bulk of my estate, $100 million, into Sylvia's name. She would manage it, care for the family, ensure the grandchildren were provided for. Mr. Adami was quiet on the phone for a moment. Then he said, carefully, "Raymond, are you certain? That is a significant move. Perhaps we should structure it differently, a trust, perhaps, with multiple signatories. Sylvia is my wife." I said, "I trust her completely." He paused again. Then he said, "Of course, I'll prepare the documents." Looking back, I think about that pause a lot. I spent the next 2 months in quiet preparation. I organized every account, every property deed, every investment portfolio. I updated my will. I wrote personal letters to my grandchildren, letters they would not read until they were older, about life, about work, about staying humble. And then I planned the dinner. I wanted it to feel like a celebration, like a gift. I asked Mrs. Elena to prepare a full meal: lamb, potatoes, fresh bread, a good wine. I asked Gerald and Patricia to bring their families. I said it was a special occasion. Everyone came. Everyone sat at the old table. And when the meal was served and the glasses were poured, I slid the document across to Sylvia. And she smiled, and she passed me a glass of water. After the dinner, after the ambulance came, after the chaos and the crying and the explanations, after all of it, I sat alone with Mrs. Elena in the kitchen. She was shaking. Her old hands, the ones with the arthritis, were trembling as she held her cup of tea. I said, "Elena, tell me everything," and she did. 3 weeks before that dinner, Mrs. Elena had been cleaning the upstairs study, Sylvia's private study, the one she used for her charity correspondence. She was not snooping. She was cleaning. She was doing her job the way she had done it for 22 years. She found a notebook, not hidden exactly, not left open on the desk either, tucked between 2 books on the shelf, casually, like someone who hadn't thought it necessary to fully conceal it. Mrs. Elena could not help but see the page it was open to, because her name was on it. "Elena needs to be gone by December." She read a few more lines. She wished she hadn't. The notebook was not a diary. It was a plan, written in Sylvia's handwriting, neat, organized, methodical. The way Sylvia did everything. It outlined, in careful detail, a series of steps. The first step was the dinner, the document signing, the transfer of assets. The second step was something Mrs. Elena described to me in a voice barely above a whisper, her eyes full of tears and full of apology. She had heard conversations, late, night phone calls in the house, when she thought everyone was asleep. Sylvia talking to someone, a man, whose voice Mrs. Elena didn't recognize. She had heard phrases, fragments. Once it's in my name, and he's been to the doctor, it won't be long anyway, and the one that made Mrs. Elena's blood go cold, it just needs to look natural. I sat very still as she told me this. I am not a man who cries easily. I have not cried since my mother's funeral, but sitting in that kitchen, listening to Mrs. Elena's trembling voice, I felt something break open in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just grief, because I knew, before she finished telling me, that the glass of water was not just a glass of water, and the smile was not just a smile. And the woman sitting at the head of my table, in the house where we had raised our children, at the table I had bought when we were young and hopeful, that woman had been planning, in careful and cold detail, to make me disappear. Mrs. Elena told me she had been trying to find a way to warn me for days. She was frightened. She was an old woman with no savings and no family nearby. She depended on this job. She depended on this house. And she knew with the clarity of a woman who has lived long enough to recognize evil when she sees it wearing a familiar face, that if she was wrong, she would lose everything. But she warned me anyway, Mr. Raymond. She said, her old eyes looking directly into mine, I have worked in this house for 22 years. I have seen you fix things quietly without being asked. I have seen you leave money in the kitchen drawer when you thought I needed it, but was too proud to say so. I have seen you be a good man every single day. She reached across the table and put her trembling hand over mine. A good man deserves to know the truth. The toxicology report came back 9 days later. The substance found in Sylvia's system, the substance she had swallowed from the glass she thought was mine, was a sedative compound. Strong, not immediately fatal in the dose that had been prepared, the investigators told me, but dangerous when combined with my specific heart medication, which Sylvia had known about for months. In my condition, with my heart, the interaction would likely have been described by a coroner as natural causes. An old man, a weak heart, a tragic passing at a family dinner. The investigators found the source quickly, because Sylvia, careful, organized, methodical Sylvia, had made one mistake. She had purchased the compound under a false name, but she had used a phone number connected to a second mobile phone registered at our home address. And on that phone, they found everything. The messages with the man Mrs. Elena had heard on the calls, a man named Victor, who had been in Sylvia's life for 4 years. The plan, the timeline, the conversations about what would happen once the money was transferred and I was gone. Gerald came to my house 3 days after the arrest. He stood in the doorway of the living room, my son, my firstborn, the boy I had worked 2 jobs to put through university, and he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face. Before, it was shame, pure, raw, undecorated shame. He said, "Dad, I didn't know." I looked at him for a long time, and I said, "I know you didn't." He started to cry, big, ugly, shaking sobs, the kind a grown man produces when he has held himself together too long, and something finally cracks. He put his hands over his face, and he cried the way I had not seen him cry since he was 8 years old, and had broken his arm falling from a bicycle. I let him cry. I did not go to him. I did not put my arm around him, not yet, because there were things that needed to be said first. 2 weeks after the arrest, I asked everyone to come back to the house, Gerald and Diana, Patricia and Thomas. No grandchildren this time, just the adults. Mrs. Elena made tea, and then I asked her to join us at the table. She deserved to be there. She had earned that seat more than anyone. Diana arrived looking pale and uncomfortable. Thomas arrived looking confused. Patricia arrived with swollen eyes. She had been crying for days, I was told. Gerald arrived last, and when he walked in and saw Mrs. Elena sitting at the table, something shifted in his face. I waited until everyone was seated, then I began to speak. I told them everything, the doctor's appointment I had never mentioned, the heart condition, the documents, what Mrs. Elena had found, what she had heard, what the investigators had confirmed. The room was completely silent. I spoke quietly. I did not raise my voice once. I never raised my voice. Not in 68 years. When I finished, I looked around the table. Diana was the color of chalk. Thomas was staring at the table surface. Patricia was weeping silently, one hand pressed over her mouth. Gerald was looking at me with the expression of a man trying to hold himself together by sheer willpower alone. Then I said the other thing, the thing I had spent 2 weeks preparing to say. Before all of this happened, before that dinner, I want you to think about the years, not the last few months, the years. I want you to think about Sunday dinners when Diana talked about my kitchen being dated, and I said nothing. I want you to think about the times Gerald explained things to me like I was a child, and I said nothing. I want you to think about how many times I sat in a room full of my own family and felt completely invisible, and I said nothing. I paused. I said nothing because I believed that love was patient. I believed that family was forgiving. I believed that the small unkindnesses were not the whole picture. I told myself that you were busy, or stressed, or young, or distracted. I looked at Gerald directly. But I want to ask you something honestly, son. When did you last ask me how I was and mean it? When did you last sit with me, just sit, with no agenda, no request, no transaction, just to be with your father? Gerald opened his mouth. He closed it again because there was no answer, not one that wouldn't break something further. And Diana, I said, turning to her. Diana flinched. You have been in my family for 12 years. I have never said an unkind word to you. I have helped you and my son build a life that most people spend 3 lifetimes trying to build. And you looked at my home, the home where your husband grew up, the home I bled to build, like it embarrassed you. Diana's eyes filled with tears. She said, Raymond, I'm not finished. I said, quietly, calmly. She was quiet. I turned to Thomas. Thomas, you are a kind man. I have always thought so. But kindness without presence is just politeness. You have been polite to me for 15 years. That is not the same as knowing me. Thomas nodded. He didn't speak. His jaw was tight. I turned to Patricia last. My daughter. My little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was 4 and say, Daddy, tell me a story. She was crying openly now. Patricia, I said, and my voice, steady for the entire conversation, softened slightly. You never treated me badly. You were always kind, but you were quiet when the unkindnesses happened. You watched, and you said nothing. And sometimes the silence of someone who loves you is the loudest sound in the room. She broke completely. She pressed both hands over her face and made a sound that I will carry with me for the rest of my days. I let the room breathe. Then I said, I am not telling you these things to punish you. I am not holding the money over your heads. I am not threatening anything. I am an old man with a weak heart who almost did not make it to today, and I want to spend whatever time I have left with people who see me. Not my money, not my usefulness, not my signature on a document. Me, Raymond, the man who bought a table for 10 people when there were only 2 of us, because he believed in the fullness that was coming. I placed both hands flat on the old table. This table has held everything. It held our first real Christmas. It held your grandmother's last birthday. It held school projects and business plans and cups of tea at 3 in the morning when things were hard. I am asking each of you, what have you brought to this table? The silence that followed was the heaviest silence I have ever heard. The legal process took months. Sylvia was charged. The trial was quiet. I asked my lawyer to keep it as private as possible, for the grandchildren's sake. I did not attend every session. I did not need to. Mrs. Elena gave her testimony. The investigators presented their evidence. The phone records, the messages, the substance, the plan, it all spoke for itself. I sat in my garden on the day the verdict was read, and I listened to the birds. I do not know exactly what I felt. It was not triumph. It was not relief. It was something more like standing in a field after a terrible storm. The destruction all around you, the air finally still, and the strange, quiet recognition that you are still standing. Gerald came to see me the evening after the verdict. He did not come with Diana this time. He came alone. He sat across from me at the old table, and he put something on the surface between us. It was an envelope. Old, a little worn at the edges. "Do you remember this?" he said. I looked at it. I did recognize it. It was a letter I had written him when he went to university, 20 years ago. I had slipped it inside his first textbook, the accounting textbook I had bought him at the beginning of his first semester. I found it last month, Gerald said, when I was going through things, trying to understand everything. He slid it across to me. I didn't open it. I knew what it said. I had written it, in that letter. Gerald said, "You wrote that the greatest thing you ever wanted was for me to be a good man, not a successful man, not a rich man, a good man." He put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands to his forehead. "Dad," he said, "I am sorry. I am so sorry for all of it, for every time I made you feel small, for every time I put Diana's opinion ahead of your dignity, for every time I chose the easier thing, impressing people, performing success over sitting at this table and being your son." He looked up. His eyes were red and raw. "I became exactly what you never wanted me to be. I looked at my son for a long time. I thought about the night he was born, the way I held him, this tiny, howling, perfect thing, and felt a love so large I didn't know what to do with it. I thought about teaching him to ride the bicycle, teaching him to throw a ball, teaching him to shake hands firmly and look people in the eyes. I thought about all the mornings I had gotten up before the sun and gone to work so that he could sleep in a warm bed. And I thought about how none of that had protected either of us from the way things had unraveled. I said, "Gerald, you are my son. You will always be my son. But you need to understand something important." He waited. "Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I forgive you. I forgave you before you walked through the door. But something broke, and broken things can be repaired, but the repair is visible. The work has to be real, every day, not because you feel guilty, not because you're afraid of losing the inheritance, because you actually understand what was lost, and you want to rebuild it." He nodded. "Slowly, deeply, starting today," I said. "You call me every day, not to talk about business, not to discuss money. You call me to ask how I'm feeling. You come for Sunday lunch. You sit at this table. You be present." "Yes," he said. "Yes, Dad. And the children?" I said. "I want to know my grandchildren, really know them, their favorite things, their worries, their jokes. I have years with them I cannot get back, but the years that are left, those I want fully." Gerald reached across the table. He put his hand over mine, the same gesture Mrs. Elena had made in the kitchen that night. "They love you, Dad," he said softly. "They talk about you all the time. James keeps asking when he can come see Grandpa's garden." Something shifted in my chest. "Send him Saturday," I said. "We'll plant tomatoes. Before I close this story, I need to tell you about what I did for Mrs. Elena, because she is the real heart of it. After everything was settled, I sat with my lawyer, Mr. Adami, and I restructured the entire estate. I established a proper family trust, with multiple signatories, with transparency, with clear structures for the grandchildren's future. And then I did one more thing. I purchased a small home, a beautiful little place, 3 bedrooms, a garden in the back, in a quiet neighborhood not far from the city. And I had it put in Mrs. Elena's name, fully owned, fully hers. I set up an account to cover all her living expenses for the rest of her life. When I told her, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, and she didn't speak for almost 2 minutes. Then she said, "Mr. Raymond, I didn't do it for a reward." "I know." I said, "That is exactly why you deserve one." She looked at me with those old eyes that had seen 22 years of this family's life, eyes that had watched quietly from corners and doorways and kitchen thresholds, and she said, "Something I will never forget. You know what I always noticed about you? Every single time you walked into this kitchen in the morning, every time, for 22 years, you said good morning to me. You looked at me. You asked how I was. You remembered my grandchildren's names. You left me notes when you were going to be out of town so I wouldn't worry." She shook her head slowly. "People who have money forget that the people who work in their homes are people. But you never forgot. Not once. Not in 22 years. She wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. "That is why I warned you. Not because it was brave. Because it was right. And because you deserve to live. I am not ashamed to tell you that I cried then. For the first time since my mother's funeral. At a kitchen table, with an old housekeeper in an apron, in the house where my whole life had played out. It was the most honest moment I had had in years. I am going to tell you something now, and I want you to hear it slowly. The money was never the point. I know that sounds strange, coming from a man who had $100 million. But it is true. The money was just paper with numbers on it. What it revealed was people. It revealed Sylvia and what she had become, or perhaps what she had always been, behind the tilting laugh and the beautiful face. It revealed Gerald and Diana, and how comfort had slowly replaced character. It revealed Thomas, and how easy it is to be present in body and absent in spirit. It revealed Patricia, and how the silence of a bystander can wound as deeply as a direct blow. And it revealed Mrs. Elena, and how decency, real decency, does not require money or status or connection. It just requires the simple human courage to do the right thing when it matters. Here is what I learned. The people who love you for what you give will leave you when you have nothing left to give. But the people who love you for who you are, they will bump into your shoulder at a dinner table and whisper 3 words to save your life. I learned that respect is not something you can purchase, not with $100 million, not with a beautiful home or a well-set table. Real respect is what you give to people before they can do anything for you. It is what you give to the old woman who cleans your kitchen. It is what you give to the man who built the table you sit at. I learned that silence is sometimes strength. I said nothing for years, not because I was weak, but because I was hoping. I was hoping the people I loved would find their way back to who they truly were. Some of them did, and I am still here to witness it. Still here, weak heart and all, planting tomatoes in my garden on Saturday mornings with my grandson James, who has his grandfather's hands and his great-grandmother's laugh. That is enough. That is more than enough. If you are watching this, and there is someone in your life, a father, a grandfather, a quiet and humble person who never complains, who shows up, who works without being asked, who remembers your name and your children's names and asks how you are and means it, go to that person today, not tomorrow. Today, sit with them, look at them, ask them to tell you a story, because one day, one ordinary day at an ordinary table, that person will not be there anymore, and the glass in front of you will be empty, and no amount of money in the world will fill it back up.